Here we go. So, thank you for inviting me into your wonderful home. We're here today for this very creative episode of the Martin Talk Show. I'm joined by some real powerhouses in theatre and creativity. I've been looking from the outside in on your Women's in Voices, a celebration. And I'm really excited to find out a little bit more to what's just happened at the festival. This was at your theatre, I understand,
Yes,
Peter.
that's right.
Do you want to kick this conversation off and let me know a little bit about your theatre and why you brought this festival there?
Yeah, the Playground Theatre, I started it way back in about 2000 as a development studio. I was at the National a few moons ago, and I was playing a leading role there opposite the wonderful Alan Bates. But at the end of my tenure, I had a disagreement with the powers that be there, and that led me to, and what I did was I stood my ground, which actors don't generally do, but I'm half Greek. And so I stood my ground, and of course that was the end of my national career. So it was a very painful incident because here I was on one of the world's great stages, the Olivier, and suddenly with a career beckoning, and suddenly it wasn't there because I stood up. So, but that's the gift of it, was it set me on my independent path. And I said to myself at that point, if I ever had my own space, not thinking that I would, I'd have an open door policy, i.e. that I would let anybody in without judging them and give them the space to play and see what hidden nuggets that there were. And so I started this in about 2000 as a development studio. We had 50 or 60 artists every year, developing new ideas, searching for the unique voice within. And I loved it. I mean, I loved it. At essence, I love playing, creating, taking risks, seeing what I've got, basically. And putting it on the table. And one year we won the Samuel Beckett Award for Innovative Theatre, and that went to the Barbican. We sent work to the Hampstead, Young Vic, West Yorkshire Playhouse. That development was with a guy called John Caird, who was the co-director of Les Miserables. And I don't know whether John's going to be listening to this, but he did come to me and say, by the way, Peter, we have no money. Really? No money? Co-director of Les Miserables. Anyway, I bought it and we did a development. It's a very good piece called The Lemon Princess. And then not everything went to an outside theatre. So I thought, well, if I had my own theatre, then I have the whole shebang. We can develop and then perform. I don't have to go to the Royal Court or whoever to say, do you like what we do? So in 2015, I decided to start a theatre. And not knowing the full consequences of what I was doing.
But it didn't open in 2015.
No. It opened in 2017. And it's been an incredible journey. The first 3 years were great. We had some incredible people there like Stephen Burkhoff, Brian Cox, who directed the last play there before with Nicole Ansari-Cox in a wonderful play called Sinners. And then suddenly we had to close for 2 years like everybody else. The world came to... So since then, it's been like grinding up. It's grinding it back up again.
You're building something here, I hear a little bit in your story there about the importance of using your voice. You've discovered something there, so I can only imagine that this festival of women's voices is really important to you.
Well, it came about. The first women's festival was last year. I mean, Naomi was the original curator on it, and Nicole and Kamini Banga and Miriam Sear joined this year, so there was 4 very powerful women. I better take a step back.
So join the conversation, Naomi and Nicole. Where did you come into this festival? Then where did you come into the theatre?
The thing is, I'll go back to a year ago, and it was just a kind of a casual remark by a colleague who's no longer at the theatre, who just sort of said, Naomi, I think you should do something around International Women's Day. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So what are we going to do around International Women's Day? Because there are already individual events that occur, on the day. They've been around for a long time, but we're a theatre. What can we do? So, can we give... And this phrase popped into my head, women's voices, a celebration. And I thought, the first thing I thought of was a wonderful American playwright called Emily Mann, who is, for 30 years, she was the head of the MacArthur Center in Princeton, New Jersey. And she had done a kind of well, she wasn't here, yes, she was here physically, a community read-through, which was part of our outreach work of another play called The Execution of Justice. And I thought, I'm just going to look through Emily's canon of work. And there was this play, Gloria Steinem, Gloria. And I thought, but that's perfect. Gloria Steinem, one of the sort of really prominent, from my research, I've discovered they call second wave feminists. And so I called Emily and I said, could you think we could do a reading of Gloria? And she said, oh, yes, that would be wonderful. So that was the starting point. And that was absolutely, and I said, well, what do you think of women's voices as celebration? And she said, oh, I think it's perfect. So that set me on the path. And that was sort of in September for March. March 8th is International Women's Day. And I did that a lot of work. So obviously go to people people you've met, other playwrights, dance, music, because I thought, well, as a theater, we can put on all sorts of events. So that was the first one, and it was successful. But this year, it was a real privilege to have 3 other women co-curating with me, because they each brought extremely interesting pieces to the table. And I was able to kick off with a tribute to my great mentor and friend, who was a great ballerina, called Lynn Seymour, with a wonderful, wonderful young dancer that I had the privilege of coaching. And then, wonderful plays, music, film, we've the whole sort of gamut. And Nicole actually was very widely represented in the festival, so I'll let her tell you one wonderful piece that she created called She, Her, as well as the other things she did as an actor. So I'll let Nicole.
So what brought you into this festival then, Nicole?
So
How did you
last
discover it?
year I was here as an actor. I brought a play called Moving Bodies, directed by Miriam Sear and also co-written by her. And it's a play about Emily du Châtelet, who was this absolute genius physicist, artist. Voltaire was her lover. And he was buried in the Pantheon, and she is in an unmarked grave. So I think women's voices, really, we agree. One of the reasons why it's important is because women's voices have either not been written into history or have been written out of history. And with everything that's happening in the world, with the manosphere and what's happening in the States, we can see there is less and less women's voices. And so when we go back to the pandemic, one of the things that I was missing was women's voices. We were all binge watching, and I have 2 boys with Brian, and it's a male household. And so what we are binge watching, is not necessarily what I want to see, and I couldn't find anything about women. The women were the mothers, the girlfriends, candy. But, and it really pissed me off. And I said, this is what I'm interested in. And I have to create something. And I got a phone call from Elena Sianko, a Ukrainian artistic director of PS 21 in upstate New York at the time. wonderful, wonderful performing arts center. And she said, I have a week for you if you have anything you want to do. First, I thought, as an actor, what do I want to play? Hedda Gabler, all the Cherry Orchard, anything that came to my mind that I hadn't done it. And I thought, no, let me create something because I want to see women's voices, women's stories. And so I created a show called She/Her, She/Her, which is all about women's voices. The idea in the broader spectrum is to bring she/her to many, many places and always incorporate local voices as well. So it reflects the place where you are, which I did in 23 when I took it to the Edinburgh Fringe, and it was very, very successful. And we had Mari Campbell and her daughter Ada Francis there as musicians, and it was truly extraordinary. And so when Naomi asked me, "What do you have?" and I didn't even think that She/Her could be revived because it's a lot of work and a lot of women and not much financial resources. So when I mentioned it to the original cast, I mean, I put an email out and said, "Hey girls, anybody interested to being in London at that time? I don't have a budget, but is anybody here?" Everybody wanted to be part of it. Yeah. They wanted to fly themselves and say, "No, this is important. This play changed my life." Because I wanted to experiment, how is it if you bring women together and you create in a feminine flow? You create in a more malleable way, in a more organic way, with less deadlines, less harsh edges, but through conversation, through community. And it was extraordinary because it's a little bit like going through a workshop, going through a community building experience, and at the same time sharing really intimate stories that resonate in a universal way because they're so intimate.
Yeah, really
And
personal. Deeply personal.
And so, I mean, the resonance was so phenomenal already in New York, and then in Edinburgh when Naomi said, "What about She/Her?" I said, "How am I going to do this?" But since everybody was so like gung-ho and game, we did it, and it was truly a wonderful experience. And there were other plays that I'd been attached to as an actress, or actor.
I still like actors.
Actress.
I still like actors. Talking of women's festival, let's go with actress.
I know. I mean, I don't care. Actor, actress.
That's often a question that I have myself. When I used to consider myself an actor, and I meet a lot of actresses, but I sometimes think about that word, that how we should present someone, and do we need to define it in the sexes? In our gender, in that creativity?
Well,
are we
in
not
the
just all
States,
actors?
it's an actor, and now the SAG Awards is the actor award.
Yes.
So I feel like actor is more accurate because actor is the profession, and it encapsulates all all genders.
Yes.
So but I sometimes do it cheekily. I'm an actress.
So do you like it then? Do you like to have that title of actress? Does that give you a form of power?
I do it more with like a little clin d'oeil, that I'm an actress. I'm not an actor, I'm an actress. No, it's I do it for fun. It's I'm totally fine with actor.
But you touched on a lot there, and I want to come back to something that you touched on, the way women's voices have been over history, and we're in a moment where I'm hearing a crying out from the world for this wanting for a different perspective from women.
Yes.
And this feels like, to me, from a male perspective, this feels like a moment. This feels like I'm hearing my 17-year-old daughter talk about TV the way you were talking about it, frustration, What's going on here with all the stories that is all male-led, that all the women are in these subservient roles, and her wanting to go into the performing arts. And I know a lot of other actors, actresses that want to play female roles, and they're not necessarily available.
Yeah.
So I can understand that when you said to these performers, come and join me, the wanting to take this on.
And I have to say that for me, She, Her was a totally life-enhancing experience. And I've already said to Nicole, I'd love to do it again at the Playground for an extended period before it goes to other places, undoubtedly. But for me, it was one of the highlights of the whole festival.
In what way did it change you?
Well, I don't think it fundamentally changed me because I was already leaning towards wanting women to have their own voice, their own expression. Nicole mentioned earlier Emily de Châtelet, who lived in France in the 1800s. She was an incredible scientist. Einstein actually said of her, if she hadn't have done what she had done, I may not have done what I had done. So in terms of the chain was hugely important. And yet, when her work was shown to the entirely male-dominated Science Academy, they said, it's not possible that a woman could have created that.
But
Why
every
not?
day I see on the internet stories of women, extraordinary women who did unbelievable things. Oh, the other really extraordinary story we had, which was called The Spy Princess, was a story of Noor Inayat Khan. Have you heard of her?
No, tell me more.
Well, she was an Indian princess. Her father was an Indian prince, and actually the first person who brought the Sufi profession to the West and to London. Her mother was American, and she grew up in Paris. They came to London in 1938 before the war. She really wanted to contribute to the war effort and joined the WAF, the WAF. But then she put herself forward to be a special agent. She was one of those they dropped in, flew in the middle of the night and became a radio operator. And she was one of the last ones. She was captured ultimately by the Nazis, tortured, never revealed a name, and was executed at Dachau. I mean, she's one of, I think, 3 women in the entire Second World War who were given the George Cross posthumously. Amazing story. And I see it on the internet, on, I don't know, history pages. And the sister of Christian Dior worked for the resistance, and, all sorts of scientists, mathematicians. I think the woman who first heard, the radio?
Hedy Lamarr.
And Hedy Lamarr.
Yeah, Hedy Lamarr, who discovered frequency hopping, and without whom we would not have cell phones today, Wi-Fi. Yeah.
She's only known as this iconic movie actress, but she was a brilliant scientist. And Nicole played Hedy as part of the festival brilliantly, I have to say.
Thank you.
So when you play these parts, Nicole, when you play something like this, do you feel a sense of importance in what you're doing? I know from myself, when I've wanted to be an actor, I've wanted to tell a story with what we're doing here, where we're having these conversations. We're wanting to share something that is important the world knows.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I only do things that I feel drawn to and that I feel need to be told, stories that need to be told. And Hedy Lamarr is definitely one of them. The other one is Constanze Mozart, which I played, and she helped finish the Requiem. So, we have all these women. Brian and I did the score in the West End, directed by Trevor Nunn, which is about Johann Sebastian Bach standing up to the tyrant king, and it's actually very, very resonant with what's happening in the United States right now. And we're going to take it to Washington, D.C. in September. And I played Anna Magdalena Bach. So there are all these women behind successful men the shadows, the ones that don't just do the laundry, you know.
And it's, I just want to add, by the way, the score in Washington will not be at the Kennedy
well,
Center.
no, thank God.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
But
Yes,
I
there's a-
also, a few years ago,
At the
told a
Shakespeare.
story which was, again, no, I think everybody, most people who know of classical music would know Ravel's Bolero. It's a very, very famous piece of music. But nobody knows that it was commissioned and written for a woman named Ida Rubinstein, who I played a few years ago in a play called Ida Rubinstein, The Final Act. And she was, again, extraordinarily famous in Paris in 1910 to 1930, buried in an unmarked grave. The same, also buried in an
Well,
unmarked.
she was part of
She
Diaghilev's
was
Ballet
part of
Russe,
the original
wasn't she?
Ballet Rouge. She was a huge star opposite Nijinsky. But because she had extraordinary wealth, which was highly unusual for her background of Russian Jewish, which is also my background, she was able to rival Diaghilev and hire all the, so she could hire Ravel and Debussy and Leonbach's. And so she was, in many ways, an entrepreneur and a producer who had a lot of work created, completely forgotten. Nobody ever talks about. They do know about her in Russia and in Paris, but otherwise, she was another remarkable artist.
So I think the Women's Festival is the playground's effort to try to put women much more at the front, as they deserve. There are so many incredible, men have hogged, and I can say this as a man, have hogged the limelight for too long. And we need more of a balance going forward.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about the Kennedy Center,
Yes.
and the voices that we have in the world right now, the politicians,
Yeah.
that very domineering voices and trying to take over the arts. So I'm wondering right now, within the roles that you've both played, what have you discovered that you can take back in the world to, I would almost like to say, fight against this aggression that we're having against the arts and aggression against voices, not just women's voices, all voices.
Marginalized voices. I think it's the going against is always tricky, because if you're fighting something with the same weapons that somebody is, it doesn't work. I see it more like Aikido, where you use the energy that's coming towards you and you transform the energy, and therefore you succeed in overcoming the enemy. And I think the patriarchy, which has led us to this desolate state that we're in right now in the world, hurts women as much as men and everybody in between. And so it actually behooves men to go hand in hand with enlightened women and enlighten themselves and go against that. That's why my next step with she, her, besides doing it all over the place with new people, is doing he, him, and then they, them. Because I think it's really important that we also hear authentic, intimate voices of men.
And men rarely share their intimate stories.
Yes.
Almost never.
I have to just interject there. I mentioned earlier Sinners, a play that Nicole did, which Brian Cox directed. There was a very specific reason why I wanted to do that play in London. It's set in a kind of vague, unspecified, I suppose, Islamic country where women are, they're certainly second best, if not even below second best in that society. And we think of organizations like the Taliban as being extreme patriarchs with their mindset with women. I believe that although it's not as noticeably extreme in the West, the mind thoughts of men is not that dissimilar to that extremity. So I wanted to bring it to this country to show people, particularly men, hey, maybe I'm not so far removed.
Maybe I think there's a voice rising up, isn't there? This manosphere.
That's scary.
It is scary.
Very
It's
scary.
I've got a 21-year-old son, and he's coming up in the world, and a lot of people around him are kind of edgy. I can see them edging that way, and I'm concerned about the voices of young men as well.
Yeah.
And so it's it's really nice to hear that when you're doing a festival like this about women's voices, that you're considering that there is another voice there as well.
Absolutely.
To not take this on just an aggression front, because that's what a lot of the men are feeling. A lot of the men are feeling under attack.
I know that when I was growing up in the playground at school, this is before I entered into relationships with women, but all I heard from boys, it was all acts of violence against women. And that's what I grew up with. That's what I was impregnated with until Naomi set me straight. But I was impregnated that way. And if I hadn't have had the guidance of somebody like my lovely wife, then I may have gone down that path, which could have led to violence against women, abuse against women, et cetera, et cetera. So it was definitely in my growing up. But luckily enough, through my own needs and the guidance of somebody like Naomi, I was able to change that.
How does your son feel? I mean, how does he respond to that kind of stimulus?
I think, I can't, he's not here to defend himself. But I think there's a younger generation that feels that the world is against them, and it's someone else's fault for the things that are going wrong.
Blame.
There seems to be a lot of blame. So it's often, it's the women, it's the foreigners, it's where can I point the finger?
Yeah.
And I think for myself as a man, I think it's taken me a long time to go, hold on, I need to look a little bit more within to look where the problems are. But on a personal note between you two then, Naomi, how did you manage to change the shift for Peter?
Well, I never thought of it that way, really. I mean, we met in New York, and I was in the middle of a big ballet career, and Peter was studying with a very famous teacher, Stella Adler, and I'd had flirtation with film. Somebody liked my look, and I thought if I have to open my mouth, I should go take some acting classes. And I was known as a dramatic ballerina, so I was already acting through my movement. And I saw, you have to do scene studies, and I thought, well, I'm going to ask the most talented person here to work with me. And it was very, very definitely Peter. So I asked him to work with me.
This sounds like it looks like a discovery here moment for Peter.
No. I always say, but you should have seen the others.
Take the credit.
It wasn't quite so simple, because I actually was married at the time. I had married the first time when I was 20. So, but anyway, and I asked him to work with me, and then we were working. He suggested Miss Julie, and we kept doing a lot of the offstage scenes.
We never actually got to the actual text at all. Never mind.
So my stay at Stella Adler's was was brief, but although that teacher just passed away, she was quite remarkable, Sandra Lee.
Sandra Lee, I remember Sandra Lee.
Yeah.
She was at the Actors Studio as well. Yeah.
She was at Actors Studio. And did you know she was the original Tiger Lily in Peter Pan, opposite Mary Martin?
Oh my God.
She was in the original Hello, Dolly. She was one of my teachers at Stella Adler's.
She was kind of in love with Peter. So when she saw that we got together,
it caused some ripples.
Well.
I don't think she was kind of in love with me. I think she definitely was.
It sounds to me like you've guided Peter just through kindness and love, and your presence has made a change.
Yeah, I
for
didn't.
him.
I mean, and he did. Well, the only thing I could say is, and it's quite a long time ago, but he did have very, very black moods at the time, and that was something that I hadn't really encountered. So all I can say is through love, through loving.
Well, I think it's definitely through Naomi gave me what I hadn't had as a child, which was nurturing. I had no nurturing, so I was severely lacking in the need to be loved. But ultimately, no matter whatever Naomi threw at me and gave me, I had to make somewhere that decision within myself to change. And of course, what Naomi did to surround me with love, of course, inevitably helped me to get through that. But the desire within me was so strong not to stay in this place of pain.
It was also very different, because in America growing up, we didn't think about sort of class. I mean, so Peter came from working class background. I come from an artist family. My father was a violinist. He was the founder and first violinist of a string quartet. My mother had been an aspiring dancer. I came from a very extremely artistic background. So it was a real interesting kind of
Having that mix.
It's called a bit of rough.
And so for you, Nicole, you're married to one of the strongest voices in acting of a generation, a real powerful, strong voice. How have you, I'm assuming you must have had some influence there. How have you done that?
Well, Brian always says that I made him a feminist. Same, really, in a way. And how did that happen? I mean, we have a big age gap, so there's also that generational, the difference in generations, that we had to overcome. But in general, I would say Brian already was a very open and very egalitarian person. But of course, the patriarchy rears its ugly head in every relationship, I would say, because we have also an internalized patriarchy in us that contributes to that. It doesn't all go one way. So I think it's, through love, but it's also through calling out. Like when something was up where I felt that he was being particularly patriarchal, I would just call it out. I have no fear calling people out with these things. I have a keen sense of justice, and when I see injustice, I can't. And so we had, a bumpy road, but I think Brian actually loved it because he quickly realized being in an egalitarian relationship and having a strong woman actually makes him stronger and actually nurtures him and gives him a home, gives him stability, instead of having to be that hard man who pushes down and has to be in control and all of that. It must be exhausting, It must be exhausting, like this manosphere, like.
Well, this is where I'm going with this. Is more, kind of like so we've gone to a personal level with you, but on a societal level, where we can take some of that advice and where we can, where our audiences come in to see our shows, what we hope that we can change there, how we can hope to influence each other on a wider level. So in coming back to the festival, how do you hope the audiences feel after they've discovered these voices?
Well, I think, I think in a way it's not different from how you hope an audience feels for any performance. I mean, you hope to inspire, you hope to enlighten, you hope to move, to make people think. Those are, as performers, those are the things that we always try to it's all really about communication, isn't it? It's if we don't communicate with each other, there's no hope. And, when we're all sort of, locked into a tiny screen, so, theater or performance, music, film, dance, it's when you are still sharing a space. I think that's the kind of only sort of hope of things remaining on a human level with AI coming in, and it's pretty terrifying where the future could go, the future of humanity. And so much distortion. But if you have somebody communicating, human emotion directly to you, and you're perceiving that, then hopefully you're moved by that.
Well, that's going way back. That's why I entered the arts. I told you earlier that I started life as a window cleaner. So for the first 6.5 years of my professional life, that's what I did. And I started my first business. And I was making money, but making money was not covering the void within me. So my need was to express, which meant my need to connect with others. And the stage is a perfect place in which to potentially connect with others. And once you get that, potentially, it doesn't happen all the time, but when you get that flow of energy between the audience and the performer, so you're in the same circle of energy, it has the potential to be transformative.
And to reflect, obviously we're reflecting human experiences, and hopefully the audience responds to that.
Yeah, holding the mirror up to nature, as Shakespeare
if not,
put it. Yeah.
Bloody depressing.
Well, I'm always trying to change the name of theatre to the empathy machine.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
That's
I love that.
That's a good one.
That's
Yeah.
essentially what we're going into, isn't it?
Yeah.
As an audience member, as an artist on the stage, we're just churning up that empathy, aren't we?
That's
so that
right.
we can.
And when people go to the theatre, I mean, I know myself, when I go to the theatre, I want to be in that. I want to be touched, as Naomi said, moved, transformed, transported. That's what I look for. It doesn't always happen, as we all know, because the elements that go into a production is actually an incredible amount. You've got to have everybody in the same energy field, everybody pulling in that same direction. You only need one or two disruptive forces, and it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and you touched on that energy and that flow and changing that within your show.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about that, because I believe in the energy that happens in this space, that happens when we connect. How are you trying to change that?
Well, we were talking about this yesterday with Brian, because our son Torin is also, he's at university at Emerson College in Boston, and as an actor, and our son Orson is also an actor. They're 21 and 24.
I don't know how they came to be there. I have no idea.
I know. And he wasn't sure if he was going to be an actor or not. And then he started this program, which is extraordinary, at Emerson College. And he started taking on bigger roles and being on stage. And we asked him in the second year, so how do you feel? Do you want to study something else? What do you want to do? And he said, I think I got it. And I said, oh, what is it? He said, whenever I'm acting, I feel so good in my body. And that's the answer. Do what makes you feel good. Doesn't mean like, oh, it makes me feel good to club a penguin to death. No, that's not what I'm talking about. But a sense of peace, a sense of completion, a sense of flow. That's why people get addicted to sports. That can be highly addictive. Running, getting into the flow state. And for some people, it's acting. For some people, the idea of being on stage is like the antithesis of what a human being is made for. A human being, in order to protect themselves, is made to cover up the emotions and not let others see what you feel in order to function in the society. What we do as actors is the exact opposite of what in nature is organic. We actually have to open it up and bring it out. It's a service to humanity in a way, where you're bringing something out that somebody else is too afraid to bring to light. And that's what we're doing. And the energy you were talking about, that is the communication with the audience. That is this invisible thread of communication that goes both ways. That's why some shows are absolutely extraordinary and some shows are like meh, you know.
I could have done without it.
Yeah.
But it sounds to me, the way that you're describing it, it sounds something instinctual,
yeah.
something that's deep within us. And I wonder, Naomi, if there's something within the dance
Well,
Oh yeah.
that comes through, because when you watch dance, I think you see energy.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting too, as a dancer who's the majority of your career, although I do act as well, and have done a number of plays, but the majority of my career is in a nonverbal art field. But and what I was saying before we started, actually, there's nothing to me. Also, I'm a musician's daughter. Don't forget, there is absolutely nothing like the music going through your body and being able to express that music to be the visual manifestation of that music and emotion. And I mean, I was fortunate in that I was able to have a lot of work created on me, and and I was always doing these dramatic roles. So, for instance, there was a famous choreographer named Anna Sokolow in New York who came out of the Martha Graham Company and was an inspiration to people like Jerome Robbins. And she made a solo for me called Kaddish that was dedicated to the memory of Anne Frank. And it was very claustrophobic and intense. And I remember one performance, actually, I think it was in Woodstock, New York. Somebody came back, they said, I've recently had a nervous breakdown, and what I saw on the stage expressed how I felt when I was in that state.
Goosebumps. Oh, I just get goosebumps.
Yeah. And so I always felt that I had the ability to move people, and that's what I wanted to do. I was not just interested in doing the physical. So unfortunately, over the years, and particularly the last 20 years or so, that a lot of the emphasis has been on technique to the detriment of the art form, I believe, and the expressive art form. And that a lot of that has shifted away from it. But that's the essence of what, because look at a gymnast or an athlete. It's an art form that when you cannot express something in words, then you can express it in dance. And that is always, in fact,
That's why Anna Sokolow went into dance, wasn't it? Because there were things she couldn't express.
But even
other than
yes, but even I saw just recently, I saw a quote that apparently George Balanchine's, and I'm not a great fan of George Balanchine. It's not the work that I'm most drawn to. I can admire it, but even he said, we're trying to explain the unexplainable. That's what you're, what we're doing. We're trying to, and it goes into kind of, I guess a spiritual. The thing I was saying to Martin earlier is, I think there's something that you can teach technique and teach, acting technique, or you can teach dance technique, but there is some definable thing that can't be taught, that I think has to do just with the spirit within an individual. I think.
Yeah.
The more creatives I meet, the more I believe that. The more I sit in these moments here where I sit and I just feel the energy within this room and the flow within this conversation. I believe in that spiritual connection between what it is that we're doing. Have you any idea how we harness it then? How we tap into it? Where do we find it?
God, if only I could bottle it. God. Yeah.
I mean, I think, as artists, you use your body a lot. You work on your voice, you work on your breathing, you work on your movement. I think opening up the body and all the senses is something that anybody could do and everybody can do, connecting to their body. For me, that is first before you go to spirit.
Yeah.
Because if you don't connect
It's a
to
g-
your
it's a
body,
gateway.
you know, yeah, absolutely, you can go.
Yeah,
Falloon
and
out
go
there.
too far off
Yeah.
into
Yeah.
you could
Yeah.
float away into space
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And meditation, for me, it's meditation. Yeah.
I must say, in recent times, I've come to the realization that it is movement for me that is most important. And I mean, I do a show I mentioned earlier, Picasso, called Picasso Le Monstre Sacré. And the bits I really look forward to every night is when I dance and move around.
Oh, Picasso's dance.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see
Picasso
it.
dances, yeah. He dances a lot, actually. A lot of people after the show come up to me and say, "You're a dancer, aren't you?" I said, "Well, I move, but I'm not a trained
I get
dancer."
asked if I choreographed. I had nothing to do
Yeah,
with
nothing
it.
to do.
Jeremy's
You
asked
just
if
make
she
it.
choreographed. Yeah. So that's when I feel. I did a show recently called "The Dream of a Ridiculous Man" by Dostoevsky, which is a short novella. Worked with an extraordinary Lithuanian director called Saulius Varnas, and it was all movement. It was all movement. He's not, and another wonderful Eastern European creative we worked with, Henryk Baranovsky, who came to the studio when it was a development studio. I invited him over so that the people there could see other ways of working. And his work was also very physical. In fact, I did
Eastern Europeans
he
usually
invited me to his company in Poland to play Macbeth, and Naomi was also in it.
I was the Black Angel.
She was the Black
So I
Angel.
was
And
manipulating them.
I spoke in English. The rest of the company spoke to me in Polish. And the way I knew where I was through the body, through the physical body. Once I could see, like, my Lady Macbeth moving, I knew exactly where she was. The most difficult part of that was when he told me to be completely out front during Banquo's ghost scene. I couldn't see them. I couldn't see them.
alone.
And so I had to speak a lot, and they were saying things, but I did learn the whole thing as a long monologue just in case. But I got through it every night. So for me, movement, physicality is utmost for me. I mean, I learn the lines really through the movement. I mean, sitting down and learning lines is a torturous process. Torturous process.
Yes. But there's something in that preparation, though, that gives us the freedom within the space.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Because for me, that's where it comes from, is being free.
absolutely,
If I find that flow state, it's where I'm most free, when I get rid of all the notes and the research that I've done
There are
before.
those magic moments. I don't know. Well, I guess yes. Obviously, other people find them in other ways, but when really special performance happens and you are finally outside of yourself, there's no observer. Often or many times, the observer is still there. The observer is in your head is still conscious while you're doing your performance. But those moments where the observer disappears and you're just completely at one with the music, the text, whatever, are really magic moments.
Well, you have to get to that place of absolute trust in what you've done creatively with everyone else, and just literally let it be.
Yeah.
Let it be.
But also, I haven't said this in a very long time, actually, but performing, and I'm going to quote the great pianist Arthur Rubinstein. And he said, "When I play the piano, I make love." And I think, for me, when performing really works, it's like making love at the best, in the most complete sense. And one really aspires to do that as much as one can. I think.
Yeah, yes to making love.
Yes.
I'm going on. When I perform later
Sign
in
me
the
up.
month, I'm going to make love to the audience. Mind you, just playing Picasso. So.
I guess there's some that might not understand where we're going, but if so some people don't consider them. I think we're all creatives, but some people don't consider themselves creatives.
Yeah.
And when they look in from the outside, they might be like, are you taking something? What are you smoking today? Where are you going with this?
Yeah.
But I do feel there's something really real here. There is something really. There's a connective power and an energy is the only way to describe it.
Yeah, and even if you're not a creative, like I remember when in Edinburgh, but it also happened at the Playground Theatre with She-Her, for example. In Edinburgh, we had, there was this, I would say he was in his mid-80s, older man with his wife and the wife's girlfriend. And he came to me after the show. And the wife went, like, yeah, he wants to talk to you, I don't know. And so he said, I have to say, this was quite extraordinary. When my wife said, we're going to go and see a show called She-Her, I fell asleep just thinking about it. And I thought, I'm going to have a nice snooze for an hour here. And I came and sat down, and instead, you made me cry. Oh. I don't know what happened, but I haven't cried in years. and another man came up and somebody that we know, and he said after the show, he called his mother to tell her he loves her, and he hadn't spoken to her in a long time. Wow. So art can not just transport us in the moment, but it can also lead to to change. It leads to being inspired to pick up the phone and make amends and so on. So even if you're not in the creative field and you don't know what we're talking about with the energy, just let yourself be transparent. At the playground, just that I held a man sobbing in my arms.
Really?
Oh, really?
Yeah, he came and said, I just want to say thank you for this was a really special evening. And he started to cry.
Wow.
It's
Wow.
transformative.
And I'm mentioning the men because you think, this must be a show just for women, with women, about women. No. It was actually really impactful for the men who found themselves in the room.
What I'm hearing within this space of creativity, within this energy, there's an opportunity for us to heal.
That's right.
Absolutely.
In there as well.
Absolutely.
And I love the name of your theatre, by the way.
The Playground.
The Playground.
Thank you.
I run a small community theatre near where I live, and I always it's not called the Playground, but I say to people, come to my playground.
Oh, right.
I love that because that's how I see the theatre environment for us, a place where we can play together. And
well, when I was thinking of the name of the development studio as it was then, it was Lynn Seymour, our friend, the great Lynn Seymour, who said, the Playground. And because she loved, I mean, Lynn was an incredible star of the ballet world and an incredible artist. But more than anything, she loved the process of developing, creating, rather than performing, funny enough. And as I was setting it up as a place to play, she gave us the name, and I was very grateful to her.
yeah, it's a special place, the Playground, that as we become adults, that we've moved on from that. But I think we still need it, don't we?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, as artists, the number one thing is to keep your child really strong and alive and vibrant. And it's one of the few professions where you don't have to be a grown-up, where you actually have to get back, which is a lot of work, because we have to take the shackles off that have been imposed on us through society and through our the way we grew up.
As you said that, I just flashed to sitting around a table for a first read of a play. It could be any play. But when I was a younger actor, I used to sit around tables because I tend to go into the rehearsal process naked. I don't go with any preconceived ideas. For instance, I'm going to be doing a play with Nicole. Well, you know, until I get to know Nicole and we start to play with each other, why should I be fixed in my head about what we're going to do? I don't know what we're going to do. And I used to sit around with all of these actors, and they gave this supposedly incredible reading, but that actually was it. They never moved from there because they were fixed, they were scared, they were full of fear. And I went in there naked and in a lot of pain, because they're probably looking at me thinking, God, he has no idea what he's doing, which was true.
It's scary to do that. It's very vulnerable.
Yes.
To go in and play. It's very vulnerable to go into an environment and go, I'm here to experiment and work things out as we're going along.
Yeah, exactly.
But that restriction doesn't help us, does it? That where we're trying to formulate it too much.
No, I mean, I just couldn't believe how fixed they were. That was their performance on the first day. Why did they need to rehearse? They've got it already. You know?
Yeah, I worked with an actress who gave an incredible performance at the first read, and 365 shows later, she was still giving that same performance.
Never moved.
Yeah,
Never moved. Yeah.
So boring.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think touching on the boring side of it is quite important as well, because that's where we find the life within the play, is it not?
I mean, for instance, every night when I do my Picasso show, you know, all the movement things in it, I don't actually pre-plan. They are as I feel on that night. So, I mean, lucky enough, I've got the music to go with me, and but I love that, being able to go on there and actually not preconceive what I'm doing. Of course, I've got to know the rest of the lines, otherwise it could be a disaster. But I love that section where I go on and just dance to the music.
And you know, we've touched on as well, there is something within the preparation that leads us to being able to be free. So we have to do that. Preparation is key. So coming back to the celebrate the women's voices, a celebration. I want to know how you're moving this forward now. Where does this go next?
I think next year. I mean, we have a number of processes in place for what we want to do next year. You know, a lot of
we might be discovering it now.
Well, when I say we, I mean you, all of us. I mean I'm a little part of it. Anyway, and no, I think because a lot of artists gave their money over the last 2 years for little money, and that's not right. We're going to start trying to fundraise very soon so that we have enough money. I mean, this year we had 20 performances, 21 performances. And most of them are just done on the day. But I personally, and see if the ladies concur with me, I'd love to get to the stage where we have enough money that, I mean, for instance, Nicole's piece had about 5 days rehearsal, and it showed. It absolutely showed. To get to the stage where we can offer people a certain amount of proper rehearsal and then the performance and getting properly paid. That is what we want to head to, and maybe do possibly less performances next year.
We'll see. I don't know. We'll see about that, but maybe.
You're the boss on this one. You're the boss.
So Naomi, what's your vision from here?
For one thing, though, we are open. Actually, let's get Kieran onto that. We're going to open up for submissions right now, actually. And so there's more so there's almost a year in which to consider. So I think it's important to have the possibility of young, old, wherever, to send in their works, their ideas. It's important to do it, I think, have the year in which to consider, not to have such compressed. But I loved if these women would like to continue to co-curate, I think it was very valuable. I really appreciate that and would have that again, you know, if everybody wants to participate, because it just makes it that much richer. We have young, we have old, we have every ethnicity, we have, as
we
I
had
said,
a 20-year-old and an 88-year-old. There was a big piece that we did.
From readings. And yes, of course, it's wonderful to have more established performance as opposed to just readings, but we'll see.
And what about you, Nicole? How do you see this moving forward?
Oh, I think it's just such an incredible, glorious idea and worthy project, I'll do everything in my power to make it bigger, better, bolder every time I'm involved, for sure, and really think about what worked, what didn't work. Maybe apply for a grant.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's not all on the artists, and just even fundraising is, it's very exhausting fundraising.
Although we met somebody recently through Carmini, and she's going to give us a proposal.
Through Miriam.
Great.
Well, through Miriam, and then through Miriam,
Yes,
of
through
course.
Miriam.
Well, in this conversation, if I had access to money, if I was someone giving out grants, I've heard here the importance of what you're doing today.
Well, I hope you get very wealthy very soon.
But I often do feel at the same time the arts are very undervalued
Oh, totally.
in society,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
being pushed to one side. So if anyone was listening in right now that could support you but wasn't sure of the value of the arts, what would you say to them?
It's vital. I think the arts is not an extra or a luxury, and it's not for the elite. It is something that reflects culture. And if we lose culture by losing the arts, we lose our humanity, which we can already see in the world where that leads to.
And also, I was going to say, I like to say, when you think about over history, really, what remains? And what remains are buildings, so architects, music, words, that you don't remember who some banker was who made, billions of, they're gone. What stays in history? What do we look at from the past? The caves paintings, or
It defines a generation. the
Well,
arts.
but also billionaires, if somebody's listening who is a billionaire,
we're very well.
where are the Rockefellers these days?
Yeah,
Where
changes.
are the Guggenheim
Yeah.
museums? We have these billionaires, and all they're doing is I actually don't know what they're doing
it
with
looks
their
to me
money.
like they're
putting it to
collecting
Mars,
it,
or they're
collecting big
collecting it,
piles.
putting it in the earth, because they're building these underground cities where they can survive, and they only, things like that. Where's your pride?
And giving back.
And giving back.
Giving back.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's gone into fear. When I look at someone like Trump, I'm probably going to get blocked from going into America now. But when I look at Trump, I see someone that is actually quite fearful of the world. Is quite fearful of the
Absolutely.
arts, of the power of the
Well, of
arts.
course, yeah.
Oh no,
Yeah,
he wants to be. I mean, he wants to be a star. I think he would be desperate to be an actor and to be, recognized as that. But like Hitler, who was a failed artist, and ended up annihilating millions of Jews and millions of Catholics and
Absolutely. Well,
Romanis and
On that point about women's suppression of arts, etc., we were in Berlin not that long ago, and the hotel we stayed in, outside was the square where the books were burnt in 1933 when the Nazis burnt. And you probably know the square.
Kristallnacht.
Yeah, beautiful square. And in the Naval Academy, somewhere in the United States, they're getting rid of lots of books and getting rid of them because they don't tie in with their philosophy of the world. In the Naval Academy, they've actually taken out that wonderful American poetess, Maya Angelou, who's an incredible woman, but they've kept Mein Kampf. Now that tells you everything you want to know about, again, removing an incredible woman and leaving Hitler's
But actually,
work.
Nicole's point about patronage, it's true. I really looked at it like that, because when you think about the Renaissance and the great art,
the Medicis,
they were
Yeah,
they had patrons.
Yeah.
Michelangelo, Leonardo
Exactly.
da Vinci, they
Yeah.
wouldn't have existed without these incredible patrons. I mean,
Absolutely.
they were all men, but even...
Well, families, anyway.
yeah, they were all men, but, they were a couple of exceptional men, it has to be said.
But we wouldn't be where we are today without their support through history.
No.
So we need them to, these philanthropists, to return now.
I mean,
That's
there are some people out there for sure, you know.
Yeah,
but,
Melinda Gates is.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean-
she's giving back.
absolutely,
With a vengeance.
absolutely.
And I think Bezos' wife is also,
Now she's left him. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, he left her, or whatever. But no, but also, I mean, in this country there are some families, the Sainsbury's, and there are a few, but they're not lots the way there used to be.
Yeah.
It's true.
Maybe we need to start inviting them to our theatres and just say,
Yeah.
come and see one of our plays.
Invite one of them to your next podcast.
Yes, I would love to, yes.
Yeah.
No, in America they've gotten rid of the National Endowment for the Arts,
Yeah.
which had already
Unbelievable.
was very small anyway. It's now gone. Well, just
Yeah.
like he's destroyed science.
Well, PBS,
art.
public PBS in America, they've taken away the
great idea.
funding.
Yeah, Sesame Street. I mean, how can you kill Sesame Street?
Yeah, yeah.
That was PBS, was it?
That was
Yeah.
PBS, yeah. Sesame Street. It was I bring puppets into my podcast occasionally.
dear,
I have a
dear.
co-host, Jake.
Oh.
He doesn't like being referred to as a puppet. He's a bird. He's a bird. But yeah, I thought puppets are a great way for us to connect and to look at things in a different way. Shift realities and. We really have covered a lot here on the importance of the art and the importance that they have on society. And so where I'm going with this now is my big question that I ask everyone. It's a question that's kind of like evolved over these 500 episodes. But individually, each of you then, I wonder, how would you make this a better world?
I think you start with your own little world.
That's what I was going to
Because first of all, you have to start with yourself. You cannot change the world from the outside. You have to start with yourself and find peace and joy and all the things that sustain us through misery and the highs and lows of life. And then you ripple it out. But also within the arts, that's how we make this world a better place, by showing people who they are, and by letting them be reflected in the stories that we tell, and by soothing them by seeing yourself on stage, on screen, in the music, in all the fields of the arts, by seeing yourself reflected. There's an incredible solace that comes from that. So I think there is so much healing and so much value in art. If you look at like art, fine art, for example, went from, yes, you have the Michelangelos, etc., and they went into the churches, then that stopped as the churches are becoming less and less interesting for people. And so where are those artists who do big things anymore? But then you look at the value of the market of the arts. And I mean, we did a play called Sessions by Patrice Chaplin, in which Peter played Edward Munch. The Scream was sold for how much? 90 million or 30 million?
It was 120 million was hit the Scream.
Oh, 120 million.
But of course, Picasso's La Femme d'un Jour sold after that for 179 million at auction. I mean, the most is I think Michelangelo, or is it Da Vinci, sold for for a Saudi prince for 400 and something million.
Yeah. So I can see how the arts can actually also be fiscally responsible and give back. And we just have to get those people who have it to support.
There is a monetary reward here as well. We've spoken a lot about the human element and what it all means to us. but financially there is a reward here.
I was going to
And
say,
it's tax deductible.
Yes,
Yes.
for a reason.
Yes.
I believe there's a reason it's
it
tax
should be.
deductible.
Actually, the theatre isn't tax deductible, is it, in this
Well,
country?
no, well,
Yes, you have you're a charitable
We're a charity.
organization.
Yeah,
Yeah,
charity,
so
yes.
Yeah.
We are a charity.
We are a charity, any bit. But the question, I was just thinking, I read today, I concur with everything that Nicole said. I think we all say the same. I think that that's how we make the world a better place, is really, particularly in this world where things are moving against humans into AI. I mean, that one of the astronauts who just came back from the moon, it was when his father, he was a little boy, took him to see Star Wars. That was what
Right.
drove him and his dream.
yes.
So there you
So
have.
there you are, a deep
There
impression.
you have a film that impacted that little boy so deeply.
A ripple effect from 30,
So-
40 years ago
He
has taken him to this
became what
moment now.
he's Just
I wonder how much satisfaction George Lucas gets out of that. But
From
he should.
that.
He should because
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, it's life. Star Wars was life changing for all of us, I think. Yeah.
I've never seen it. I
anyway.
know.
You've
Well,
not
not
sat down
for
and
you,
watched
though.
Star Wars?
I've never seen it. Oh, I was going to say sugar. Oh, sugar. I've never seen it.
Maybe it's a generation.
Maybe it's a generation thing.
yeah.
So,
It's worth visiting A New Hope at least. And
Yeah,
Empire Strikes
absolutely.
Back.
For me, again, I absolutely concur with what Nicole said about making the change. There's a song there, isn't it? Making the change within. I know for myself, coming from I grew up I inherited, I am a failure from my parents because they had a very deep sense of failure. And that burdened me for a large part of my life that I could do nothing with my life. And I managed to transform. I actually made some very difficult decisions. I left people I was around when I was a young man because I could see their lives mapped out, and I definitely didn't want to go where they were going. And they probably ended up in that direction I saw. So so the changes sometimes are painful, because you've got to make a change, and that means sometimes leaving one's family, leaving one's friends, to go on the path that speaks to you. And I did that. I went from being a window cleaner with no particular aspirations other than trying to make some money to getting involved in the arts, even though I had absolutely no association with the arts when I was growing up. I think I knew Shakespeare, but apart from that, not very much. And I've loved the journey, but it's so I would say it's about making that change within. If I want to change anyone here around me, I make the change. It's not for me to. I tried to change my mother once because she was a hugely destructive force in my life. And I was telling her what I felt about it. I was trying to reach her. She threw every kitchen plate, saucer at me, and I was shielding it away from her. And I thought, okay, I'm not going to change her, but what I can do is change myself. And then when she died, I went to the place of rest, chapel, just myself and her, and I told her 100% how much I loved her and thanked her for what she did, even though she was a hugely destructive force in my life. But I
was also a creative force. She created you.
She created me. But I made that journey. I made that journey within myself to get to that place where I could tell her. Unfortunately, it was after she died. But so yes, absolutely, make that change within.
Wow, that's powerful.
Gandhi said that, no?
This has all been really powerful. This has been a really powerful and important conversation for me, listening to all of you speak today. So I truly appreciate you sharing. I have got one last question that's come to me on voices, actually. Yeah. I mentioned my 2 children today, and they're the new generation growing up. So just something on the next generation and the importance of their voice. I understand that, how important it is to use our voice, but the world seems to be silencing a lot of voices. Women's voices are silenced. What would you say to that next generation?
I mean, I have 2 boys, and they're 21 and 24, and I am just so incredibly proud of them because they went exactly in the opposite direction of the manosphere. They are very respectful young men. They always fight on the side of justice for marginalized people. And of course, they have me and Brian as the parents, so we can take some responsibility, but you can't always. You know, there are stories of wonderful people who raise children, and because of who they encounter in their school and in their environment, you know, those children end up in the gutter, they end up drug addicts, they end up in the manosphere or whatever. How do you see it going forward with your son and your daughter? Because you have one of each, so that's a really interesting position to be in as a parent.
I see them needing to take a position of being brave in this world and not being frightened to speak up when they see something wrong, when they disagree with something. Because, yeah, like I say, I feel like that generation is being pushed into a position where maybe for a moment that they can think something wrong, but we're unable to talk that through. You know,
Right.
I like to take a position with my children where we open up and we go, right, okay, so we did something wrong today, but how are we going to change that, and what did we do wrong, and why did we think something wrong? And so, yeah, having some freedom within us to, if we do sit in a place that's not right for us right now, to move out of that freely.
Yeah, I think also, you know, this thing of, well, owning one's voice. I mean, I think it can take a lifetime, actually. So, because there's so many constraints of society, and so much of how, particularly as women, we're brought up to want to please everybody and to have everybody like us. And, you know, I find that that still pervades part of who I am. And it's, you know, one has to sort of always fight against that. So I'd say try to own your own thinking, your own voices, believe in who you are. And I think, yes, meditation, things like that, to come to the center of what it is you believe, what means something to you.
But also going back to the empathy machine you were mentioning,
Yes.
I think the empathy machine, otherwise known as the theater or the playground, where we can be free, is if you allow people to be touched, and if you allow them to open themselves up to empathy, to compassion towards themselves as well, to forgive themselves. I don't think anybody who is connected with their true feelings would need to suppress anybody. So the service to humanity is manifold. I mean, it's endless, because when you open somebody up to their own empathy,
Yeah.
you know, beautiful things can happen.
And I guess you'd ask, I mean, you know, we didn't have the good fortune to have children, so I haven't had the experience of raising a child, but I guess it's that, you know, we could ask, what would you love? What would be meaningful in your life that you would really, really love? How would you, you know, that, I guess that's, and we're fortunate, and particularly someone like myself who started life, you know, as a dancer, you have to start your life very young. So I was fortunate that I had a path from the time that I was very, very young. But I can imagine it can be challenging if you don't have that sense of where to go.
You know, that saying, the children are our future, aren't they?
They're the
That's
future.
that's where we're going.
They're the future.
And
And
so,
they
Absolutely.
have
you
the
know,
capacity to
have
shape things.
yeah, and use that love.
and use that love. Yeah.
Well, this, like I say, this has been a wonderful and really powerful conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you all for sharing
Thank
so
you.
much. I really do
Thank you for having
appreciate
us
it.
here.
And if anyone has been watching or listening to this conversation, we appreciate you too for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.